Imagine holding your breath in this dimly lit, just flickering hospital hallway.
Oh, the worst feeling.
Right. And, with absolute certainty that the zombie you just managed to drop with your last 2 bullets is about to violently mutate, stand back up, and sprint at you in the dark.
Yep.
Now, imagine realizing that to survive the next 10 minutes, you have to actually crawl over to that twitching corpse and harvest its infected blood just to craft the item you need to literally save your game.
Which is just agonizing.
It really is. That level of sheer agonizing stress is a notoriously difficult flavor to get right. Because, it's pretty universally acknowledged in the gaming world that when developers try to mix pure, unadulterated survival horror with, high-octane action, you usually end up making a really weird smoothie.
Yeah, and it rarely tastes good to anyone. I mean, you put the creeping, slow-burn dread into the blender with these explosive, blockbuster set pieces, and the result is often just a compromised, watered-down experience.
Oh.
But for our deep dive today, we're looking at a completely different approach to this.
A completely wild approach.
Truly. We are digging into all the gameplay mechanics, developer choices, and franchise history to understand Resident Evil Requiem, subtitled Two-Headed Mutant, which is the 9th mainline game in this legendary franchise.
Right.
And the core mission for you listening today is to explore how game developers tackle this seemingly impossible balancing act of fear and empowerment.
And the way Capcom tackled it here is just, it's wild. They looked at that blender and they literally just threw it out the window.
They really did.
Instead, they slapped a raw, bleeding steak and a bright bowl of fruit onto the exact same plate.
Right.
They completely stopped compromising. Because if you give a terrified protagonist an assault rifle, suddenly the haunted house just isn't scary anymore.
Right, the tension is gone.
And if you force an action hero to crouch walk through a forced stealth section, it feels like tedious, busy work. So Capcom just decided, you know what, let's stop trying to blend them.
And the stakes for this design choice were monumental, honestly. If you look at the historical context, this franchise has struggled with this exact friction for decades.
Well, for sure.
They have enjoyed massive, industry-defining success, but they've also suffered periods where they completely face-planted by leaning too far in one direction.
Yeah, alienating half their fan base in the process.
Exactly. So their radical solution for Requiem was to essentially staple 2 entirely distinct parallel games together into one single experience.
Which gives us 2 completely separate points of view to explore.
Right. On one side, there is this slow, terrifying first-person haunted house experience that borrows heavily from the horror-first approach of Resident Evil 7.
So scary.
And then, running parallel to it, interwoven through the narrative, is the fast-paced, third-person panic and chaos that draws its DNA directly from Resident Evil 4.
So let's pull apart that horror half first. The raw steak on the plate, so to speak. Because this is where the developers fundamentally reconstruct the sensation of dread from the ground up.
And they do it brilliantly.
They really do. You spend this half of the game stepping into the very unlucky shoes of Grey's Ashcroft. And the critical piece of design here is that Grace is, she's not a super soldier.
Not at all.
She is an FBI analyst. She is just an ordinary, highly relatable person who has some basic weapons training, but completely lacks any sort of superhuman physical strength.
And that lack of physical power forces a really brilliant psychological pivot.
How so?
Well, when you lack strength in a horror setting, which, by the way, for Grace, is this decaying hospital doubling as a secret virus lab, your primary resource immediately becomes stealth.
Right.
Your survival entirely depends on moving carefully, listening to footsteps, and just staying quiet. And the developers leaned heavily into this vulnerability through the audio design and the vocal performance.
Oh, the voice acting is incredible.
Angela San Albanolens plays Grace, and she delivers her lines with this quaking, halting terror. It grounds your experience as the player in genuine fear.
You really feel it.
You do. You are never under the illusion that you are controlling some superhero avatar. You're embodying someone who is desperately, terrifyingly out of her depth.
You literally feel that desperation in your own chest while playing. And, the environment doesn't just feel hostile, but the enemies themselves have been redesigned to amplify that tragedy.
Yeah, the T-virus mutation in Requiem is fascinating.
It is, because it leaves the undead with these lingering fragments of their memories and their former daily habits. Like, one of the details that stands out is sneaking past a zombie maid.
Oh, that part is so creepy.
Right, she's just mindlessly, obsessively trying to clean a bathroom mirror with a bloody rag. And later, you encounter the zombie chef in the kitchen who is violently cleaving through indistinguishable piles of meat.
And the singer in the lounge?
Yes, the singer belting out off-key, haunting notes to an empty room. It's just so unsettling.
But that design choice adds this layer of tragic humanity to the monsters. And more importantly, it drastically alters the gameplay mechanics.
Because they aren't just mindless drones.
Exactly. Because these infected individuals have retained these residual habits, they maintain a modicum of motor control. I mean, they can hold weapons, they can use tools, they act unpredictably.
Which is terrifying.
It is, but it also means their behaviors can be observed and exploited by a clever player. You're no longer just memorizing rigid patrol routes on a map, you're manipulating their broken personalities.
Which brings up the noise complaint zombie.
Yes.
The perfect example.
This is just the perfect illustration of this mechanic. So picture this. You're creeping through a storeroom, trying to avoid two zombies shuffling around in the dark, and one of those zombies is actually slurring out a complaint about noise.
Just mumbling about kids these days being too loud or something.
Yeah, exactly. Just agitated about things being too loud. But you desperately need a crafting item nearby, so you have to smash open a wooden crate. And the crashing sound completely enrages the complaining zombie. But not at you.
Right. Instead of attacking the player, he turns around and violently rips his fellow zombie apart because he's so overstimulated by the noise.
It's so chaotic.
It is, and it creates this perfect, chaotic distraction for the player to just sprint toward the exit.
And those emergent gameplay moments are what make the stealth feel so alive. But, that same unpredictability is also weaponized against you.
Oh, definitely.
And they do this by reintroducing one of the most stressful mechanics in survival horror history, the blister heads.
Oh my God, the blister heads. It's a direct, terrifying callback to the Crimson Heads from the 2002 Resident Evil 1 remake.
Yeah.
Just the thought of them ruins any sense of comfort.
And that is the exact psychological goal. I mean, in most games, when you defeat a standard enemy, their body just disappears.
Or it just stays on the ground as set dressing.
Right. You clear a room, and you subconsciously mark that room as safe in your mental map. Requiem completely shatters that unspoken contract.
You are never safe.
Never. Because occasionally, those seemingly dead monsters will suddenly resurrect. They convulse, they scream, and they rise back up as blisterheads. And they are significantly faster, highly aggressive, and they absorb a massive amount of ammunition.
It turns the simple act of backtracking into a waking nightmare. Like you realize you need to run back through 3 hospital hallways to unlock a door, and you have to walk past the bodies of the zombies you already killed an hour ago.
Just waiting for one to jump up.
Yes. You're just staring at the floor, inching forward, asking yourself, is this the time you jump up and eat my face?
It compounds the anxiety because the game physically takes away your ability to ever feel safe.
And think about the psychology of that compounding pressure. You are already stressing over a dwindling supply of ammunition.
Always.
You're constantly weighing whether the loud crack of your handgun will attract more threats from the next room. Adding the blisterhead mechanic means that pulling the trigger might solve your immediate problem, but it acts like a high-interest loan.
Ooh, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, you're borrowing time now, but you're creating a much more lethal, faster problem for yourself in the near future. And the developers use this anxiety to funnel you directly into the game's infected blood crafting system.
The crafting system is where this game really starts to play mind games with you.
It really does. As Grace, your primary method of fighting back relies on crafting items using infected blood.
Which is so gross.
Very gross. You have to physically extract this blood from stagnant puddles, from buckets of gore scattered around the hospital, and most crucially, from the corpses of the enemies you just killed.
Right.
And you use this infected blood to create various tools, the most important being the hemolytic injector.
Which is a lifesaver.
Absolutely. It's this syringe you can stab into a downed zombie to literally explode their body, permanently destroying them so they cannot ever resurrect as a blisterhead.
Yeah.
But look at the spatial requirement here. To get the blood, the game forces you to step out of the shadows and walk directly into the danger zone. You have to get uncomfortably, dangerously close to the exact things you were desperately trying to hide from.
Okay, I do have to push back on the pure real-world logic of this system, though.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
Right, because the hemolytic injector, sure, I can buy that. It's a localized chemical explosive for a corpse. Fine.
Yeah.
But you use this exact same pool of infected blood to craft handgun bullets.
Yep.
and typewriter ink ribbons.
Yeah.
Am I literally forging brass casings out of hemoglobin? Like, mathematically, scientifically, it makes absolute zero sense.
No, if you try to map it to real-world physics, it completely falls apart.
Totally.
But functionally, within the ecosystem of the game's design, it forces a flawless gameplay loop.
It really does. Because if you're the player, you are staring at your inventory screen in absolute agony. You have one vial of infected blood. Do you craft the injector to permanently destroy that body on the floor so it doesn't become a blister head later? Or do you ignore the body and craft the bullets you need to survive the 3 zombies waiting in the next room?
Or do you craft the ink ribbon so you can physically save your game progress?
Exactly. Every single choice means sacrificing something else you desperately need.
And that artificial scarcity constantly reinforces Grace's vulnerability. She simply cannot fight everything. I mean, there are hulking, invincible, stalker enemies patrolling the hospital that she can only run away from.
You're just constantly relying on contextual, desperate actions. Slamming a heavy door in a monster's face just in the nick of time, hiding under hospital beds, holding your breath.
It is a carefully controlled, meticulously paced environment of creeping dread.
Grace's entire survival relies on hiding from consequences. But the developers knew they couldn't sustain that level of anxiety for 15 hours.
No, you'd burn out.
Right. They needed a counterweight. They needed to force you to run directly into the chaos.
Right.
Because what happens when you take that carefully curated, terrifying escape room of a hospital and you drop a highly trained action hero right in the middle of it?
You introduce Leon S. Kennedy.
Yes. And here is where the parallel game design really shows its teeth. Leon is operating on an intercepting path through the exact same locations. The horror half and the action half are happening simultaneously.
But the way they handle Leon early on is interesting.
Yeah, because during the first half of the narrative, Leon only makes these jarring 15-minute cameos. You'll be playing as Grace, sneaking around, and suddenly the perspective shifts to Leon because the game needs to throw a massive exploding boss fight at you.
The contrast is intentionally jarring. Leon's sections embody the panicky desperation of Resident Evil 4. You know, you're scrambling around tight spaces, completely cornered by hordes of monsters that can absorb an absurd amount of punishment.
But Requiem takes that established combat formula and injects a massive dose of systemic chaos and serendipity.
The chaos is off the charts.
Oh, it really is.
Yeah.
Like this one incredible moment. You walk into the hospital lobby as Leon and immediately get rushed by a horde of infected patients and doctors.
Okay.
And suddenly, one of the doctors busts through a set of double doors carrying a literal chainsaw.
Classic Resident Evil.
Right. So you shoot the guy, standard action game protocol, the guy drops the chainsaw. But the chainsaw stays on.
Just running on the floor.
Yes. It is spinning wildly on the floor, bouncing around, actively threatening to slice your ankles. And then another zombie just bends down, picks up the live chainsaw, and starts swinging it.
Oh, wow.
But because they lack motor control, they just wildly slice through all of their own infected allies.
That encounter perfectly encapsulates the brilliance of Leon's campaign. The sheer stupidity of the infected AI becomes a dynamic environmental hazard. It can result in a sudden catastrophe if you get backed into a corner, or it can offer a massive tactical advantage if you position yourself correctly. The game constantly encourages you to lean into this environmental combat rather than just relying on your firearms.
Yeah, you can rip an IV rack out of a patient's arm and use it as a spear to pin them to a wall.
Which is brutal.
Or you can heave massive propane tanks into a horde and shoot them out of the air. And honestly, my absolute favorite detail, when that chainsaw finally runs out of gas and stops spinning on the floor, you can pick it up.
Yes.
After 2 decades of running away from chainsaw-wielding maniacs in this franchise, it is deeply, fundamentally satisfying to just pick one up and go to town.
It fundamentally shifts the power dynamic. It allows you to vent all the frustration you built up while playing as Grace. But Leon also carries his own dedicated melee weapon, which is a tactical hatchet. And this serves multiple functions. Slashing with it conserves your precious ammunition. You can use it to execute downed enemies before they have a chance to mutate into blister heads. But its most vital game-changing function is the parry mechanic.
The parry mechanic changes everything about how you approach a fight.
Completely. You can use the hatchet to deflect almost any incoming attack if you time it perfectly. And think about why the developers had to include this.
Because of the movement, right?
Exactly. In horror games, the camera is kept very tight to your character's shoulder, restricting your field of view so you can't see what's sneaking up beside you. And movement is deliberately left feeling a little clunky and slow to simulate the weight and panic of a terrifying situation.
Yeah, you turn like a tank.
Right. If you tried to physically dodge out of the way of a swinging chainsaw with tank-like movement, the game would feel fundamentally unfair and frustrating. The parry system solves this design limitation,
It rewards twitch reflexes and makes Leon feel like a highly trained soldier.
giving you a microscopic window of invincibility without forcing the developers to zoom the camera out and break the claustrophobia.
But to keep it balanced, the hatchet blade dulls with every parry. You have to physically stop, find a safe corner, and sharpen it with a whetstone.
Which adds another layer of frantic resource management right in the middle of a chaotic firefight.
It is just brilliant design. The pacing of all this is what fascinates me, though. You were talking about this incredibly tense, slow, methodical hiding experience with Grace, and then suddenly you're Leon, parrying chainsaws, throwing propane tanks, and roundhouse kicking zombies into walls.
It's quite the shift.
It's like leaving a terrifying haunted house and immediately walking into a frantic mosh pit. How does that constant whiplash not completely ruin the momentum of the game?
Well, it acts as a psychological relief valve. It is very much like hot and cold plunge therapy.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, fear and tension are exhausting emotions. If you ask a player to sustain that level of creeping dread for 15 hours straight, their nervous system eventually adapts. They just become numb to the horror.
Right, it stops being scary.
Exactly. By haphazardly throwing you into Leon's chaotic, action-heavy segments, the game shocks your system. The frantic, adrenaline-fueled panic of a firefight acts as the hot plunge, resetting your nervous system.
So that when you go back to Grace.
Exactly, so that when the game throws you back into Grace's shoes, you can actually feel the chilling, slow-burn anxiety of the cold plunge all over again. The two halves act as palate cleansers for each other.
You need to flex the action muscle so the fear muscle can rest and recover.
Well said.
And speaking of resting muscles, in the second half of the game, Leon takes the spotlight, and the game does something practically guaranteed to make longtime fans cheer. We leave the hospital.
And we go back to Raccoon City.
Yes, returning to Raccoon City is just the ultimate nostalgia play for Capcom.
For players with a deep history with the franchise, venturing back into the ruins of that destroyed city is a surreal experience.
Oh, especially the return to the Raccoon City Police Department, the RCPD.
Such an iconic location.
It isn't just some generic police station. The developers made it a perfect visual match to the building from the 2019 Resident Evil 2 remake.
It's amazing.
It's partially destroyed by the missile strike. The layout is blocked off by rubble, but it is just familiar enough to give you chills. And this specific location provides some much-needed emotional weight and character depth for Leon.
Which he needs, let's be honest.
Definitely. He's typically written as a collection of cheesy one-liners piled inside a cool leather jacket.
But here, it grounds him as a character who actually experienced trauma there. But, this return to Raccoon City also serves as the perfect bridge to discuss the game's broader thematic struggle.
Yeah, let's get into the critiques.
Because there is a tangible friction between honoring a legendary past and simply running out of new ideas. The most common critique compares Requiem to an aging rock band that is only interested in playing its greatest hits.
Right. They know exactly what the crowd wants to hear, and they play those hits flawlessly, but they aren't writing any new songs. And the critique points out that in Capcom's quest to trim all the fat and refine the modern formula to perfection, some of the classic mechanics that build the franchise have just been left to waste away. Specifically, the puzzles.
Oh, the puzzle.
The puzzles in Requiem are barely puzzles at all. When you find an interesting object or a key, the game immediately, almost aggressively, makes it obvious what you need to do with it. The primary example being the organ donation cooler.
This one is so telling.
This detail drove me crazy. So you find this intricate medical organ cooler. The back of it is covered in complex locks, dials, and temperature gauges.
Sounds great for a survival horror game.
Right. As a classic fan, you're thrilled. You're thinking, okay, I'm going to have to scour this wing of the hospital for environmental clues, read some obscure lore in a doctor's journal, and figure out a complex cipher. You're ready for a challenge.
And then?
Half an hour later, you walk into an office and literally just find a piece of paper sitting on a desk that features an exact step-by-step diagram of how to arrange the dials to open the cooler.
No thinking required.
None. It requires zero actual brain power. It's just a fetch quest disguised as a puzzle.
And that highlights a modern developer's intense fear of player friction. I mean, they're looking at retention metrics and telemetry data. They know that if a modern player gets stuck on a puzzle for more than 5 minutes, there is a high probability they will pull out their phone, look up a guide, and disengage from the atmosphere of the game entirely.
Or worse, just quit playing.
Exactly. So to prevent that, they intentionally sabotage their own puzzles, ensuring the roller coaster never stops moving forward.
And it isn't just the puzzles where the developers struggle with friction. There are several frustrating trial and error combat loops in the later stages. Like, during the Raccoon City sequences, you face zombified military soldiers firing mortar launchers from behind cover.
Which is just a nightmare.
The mortar shells are incredibly difficult to see coming due to the camera angles. And at the exact same time, you have other infected soldiers spraying assault rifle fire that is nearly impossible to dodge.
That's just punishing.
You just end up getting repeatedly blasted to pieces until you essentially memorize the exact sequence of enemy spawns through repeated deaths.
Which represents the worst kind of difficulty spike. It isn't challenging your mechanical skills or your strategic planning. It is simply taxing your patience by forcing you to rote memorize a chaotic room.
But the most revealing frustration stems from the collapsing environment trap.
Oh, this is a great example.
This specific track is the perfect counter-argument to a very loud, very common complaint in modern gaming. You know, we constantly hear hardcore gamers complaining about too much yellow paint.
Right, the visual guidance.
Yeah, the argument that developers putting bright yellow tape on ladders or painting a ledge white so you know exactly where you're supposed to climb ruins the immersion. People argue it holds the player's hand too much.
But look at what happens when developers don't use the yellow paint.
Exactly. The collapsing floor trap perfectly illustrates this. So you enter a room where you are clearly supposed to use the environment to defeat a swarm of zombies. And you're doing a great job. You're trapping enemies, utilizing the physics engine, being incredibly clever with the space.
Having a great time.
Right. But suddenly, the entire floor collapses underneath you. You die instantly, and the encounter resets.
Okay.
So you try again. You fight beautifully, the floor collapses, you die again.
Frustrating.
It takes multiple frustrating deaths to realize that by backing up and using the environment as a weapon, you are accidentally cutting off your own exit. The game never explained what the actual goal of the room was.
You had no idea you were even supposed to be running toward a specific timed exit in the first place.
Yes, and this is exactly why developers use the yellow paint.
Yeah.
If you don't clearly signal the intended path, players get stuck in agonizing, momentum-killing trial and error loops where they are actively punished for experimenting. If a player dies because they missed a headshot, they blame themselves. If they die because the game didn't tell them where the door was, they blame the game.
And that is an incredibly strong defense of visual guidance and signposting in game design. And it synthesizes into a fascinating irony about Requiem as a whole.
How so?
Well, over the last decade, Capcom has polished this Resident Evil formula to an absolute shining perfection. They have removed almost all the rough edges.
Yeah, they really have.
But in doing so, they have accidentally smoothed over the very friction that made the classic game so memorable. The genuine brain-teasing puzzles, the organic joy of environmental discovery, the terrifying feeling of being truly, hopelessly lost. Those elements have been sanded down to ensure a frictionless cinematic experience.
So when we pull back and look at the big picture of Requiem, the consensus is pretty clear. It really does feel like two entirely separate games stapled together.
It definitely does.
You have the methodical, terrifying, stealth-driven vulnerability of Grace's haunted house. And right next to it, you have the chaotic, parry-heavy, chainsaw-juggling adrenaline of Leon's action movie.
But they are two phenomenally executed games.
They really are. They never feel like they are fighting each other for dominance. Instead, it serves as a testament to the idea that sometimes, instead of making constant compromises to try and do everything just passably well, it is actually better to lean entirely, unapologetically, into the specific, disparate things you do best.
It is a remarkable, undeniable achievement in refinement. But if we connect this to the broader landscape of creative media, it raises a lingering, important question for you to consider long after this deep dive ends.
Oh, like this.
Think back to your analogy of the raw steak and the bowl of fruit. Capcom has perfectly prepared both items. The meal is technically flawless. But if a creator or an entire legendary franchise perfects its formula so completely that it is literally just playing its greatest hits without a single missed note,
Right.
Where does it go next?
That's a great question.
Is the ultimate destination of perfecting a formula actually the death of innovation? Because when the steak and the fruit are flawless and you refuse to put them in the blender ever again to discover a new flavor, what happens when there are simply no more hits left to play?